Hi everyone, this is Oscar versus Celine. Let's get into it. Okay, Guaco piano D6. Yeah, it's playable. It's, a bit passive maybe, but it's quite playable. You're not really playing for a win as what black, but that's fair enough. D4, Bishop E7. Takes, queen takes, bishop takes. Okay, so the queens are off the board, and yeah, it's better for white because white's after something like bishop e3 or knight c3 or something like that, white has just got three pieces out and black's only got one. However, black with very careful play should be able to achieve a position which is quite defendable. The only problem is because white has got better development, the position's much easier to play for white. It's very difficult to play for black, and it's very easy to go wrong. So you're getting into a position which is technically, I think, even, but yeah, hard to play. Bishop beat what? Okay, so white's simple trick. He's trying to just win a free pawn. This looks like just a complete waste of a move. I mean, yeah, the thing is, you can just play the simple f6 if you want, because sure, white can smash black's pawn structure, but black has the two bishops in a fairly opened up position, and this is going to create a few problems for black defensively because these pawns, and in particular these squares in front of these pawns, are holes that white can use. But as the game progresses, those two bishops are just going to become more and more powerful. And having two bishops is a great advantage because you're always threatening to trade your dark squared bishop for a knight and go into an opposite color bishop ending, which is drawn. So you've got the option of trying to force a draw whenever you need to. I mean, it's not as easy as I'm saying, but it gives black that option. Meanwhile, those two bishops control a lot of squares, can really work very well together. So f6 is perfectly fine. Also, I mean, because this e pawn isn't defended, I mean, bishop d7 looks fine to me as well. If white thinks, oh wow, I can win a pawn, he doesn't, because after takes here, you just got bishop takes e4, and this is now great for black. Two bishops and not even a pawn down, not even a wrecked pawn structure. So bishop b5, I mean, the very calm bishop d7, I think is great for black, and just a simple f6, I think, is perfectly fine. I think black should be quite happy with that as well. Another move like bishop f6, just defend your e5 pawn and just say to white, go ahead, take my knight, is fine. Lucky for white, black fell for this one move trap and played knight e7. Probably worried about having the double pawn. So double pawns aren't a problem if you've got two bishops versus bishop and knight. So the knight's defending the knight, thinking everything's covered, and then white just goes and grabs a free pawn. So that's very lucky for black. It's something for white. It's not something black would normally, I imagine, fall for. And now a6 was tried, and this leads to some complications. Like if the knight takes, the pawn takes the bishop. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can mess up the pawn structure and deny them the two bishops by taking this at the end. The problem is you've now got an opposite color bishop ending. You're a pawn up, but white squared bishop versus dark squared bishop is going to be very, very hard to win anyway. And also, this rook is on a half open file. It's very uncomfortable for white. He has to deal with this problem of this a2 pawn, and moves like a3, can allow things like b4 to happen. It's not much, but it's just uncomfortable. So after a6, I mean, the other option is bishop takes, but that's going into the two bishops situation. So, bishop takes, you take with a knight, and you say, fine, you can swap knights if you want. And you've got this two bishops versus knight position once again. The difference is white is a pawn up in this situation. So it is better for white, but, it may be very tricky. Probably the best thing to do here would be to, yeah, probably, yeah, it's hard. I'm trying to work out. knight takes is going straight for the opposite color bishop ending. Probably not what I'd like. Probably bishop takes is the best way to do it. And yeah, you've got bishop and knight versus two bishops, so you are a pawn up, and you have wrecked black's pawn structure. This is probably the way white should have played it. What white did was white took with the knight, and black took back with the pawn, leading to I don't know. Should you take back with the knight instead? That's what I'm looking at, because then if he takes, it's two bishops versus bishop and knight. If he moves his bishop away, then your pawn structure isn't ruined. But he is a clear pawn up. Yeah, it's a tricky one. After taking with the knight, black definitely should take with the bishop. Probably best is this. That's probably just the best way to play it. And go into this position here. Okay, so black played, white took with the knight. Black, I think, should have taken the bishop straight off, didn't. Took this and took it with the pawn. I think take with the knight, definitely. Don't, force white to give up the two bishops if he wants to smash your pawn structure. I mean, looking at the engine, though, the engine wants to take with the pawn, not with the knight. I'm not really sure why. Oh, okay, it's sort of changing its mind now as it analyzes a bit deeper. It is very close according to the engine, but this to me seems like the much better option. Take with the knight and keep your pawn structure intact, and say give up the two bishops to wreck my pawn structure. So b took. Now this bishop doesn't. Now this bishop just needs to retreat anywhere. Back here is fine. He is fine. Yeah, he went to c4. That seems okay to me. Castles. Yeah. Knight c3. Yeah, just developing. Rook here, trying to get some pressure down here. Bishop e3, that's okay as well. Gotta be a bit careful. Knight g6. Yeah, okay. Castle's long. Knight here. Bishop back there. I think that's fine, taking away squares from there. I don't know, bishop b3 is very tempting as well. Just leaving the bishop on that diagonal. Bishop e2 seems fine to me. Now, bishop f6 was played. Okay. The idea seems to be to move the knight, probably to here, with the idea of trying to chop this knight off and win the e pawn that way. So white has to be careful of this sort of thing. Bishop d4 seems like a good idea to me right here. So if the knight ever moves, you just trade bishops straight away. That would be the way I'd be playing it. He went for f4. Now it's getting really dangerous. And this knight went to g4, so threatening the bishop, and got knight fork ideas here. Whoops. The bishop should just go to d4 and just get rid of that entire strategy, threaten a trade of bishops, and it's looking good for white. But he didn't. He took this knight. I think this is a huge mistake, a massive blunder, because now black gets her plan. She gets to chop off the knight and grab the e-pawn. And, yeah. So bishop takes, rook here, chop it off, and then grab the e-pawn. And you can't even grab this double pawn because the bishop's on pre. And this looks dead drawn to me. White has all the advantages because of black's wrecked pawn structure, the doubled isolated pawns and the isolated pawn. But the opposite colored bishops make this very, very difficult to win. So yeah, I think white's thrown away most of the advantage in this position by taking this knight, whereas bishop d4, and white's just got a tremendously good position, a pawn up and wrecked pawn structure. Black doesn't even have the two bishops to show for it. So yeah, massive mistake right there. Takes, and rook took on e4, and it's still very difficult to defend this, but I think this is very levelish now. h3, bishop e6, rook d1. The bishop jumped into d5, probably got some ideas of moving this rook and trying to grab this. Rook d4, okay, takes. Yeah, rook g3, forking the g7 pawn and the bishop. Isn't that good though? because the bishop can defend the h pawn. I don't know. Just have a look. Bang, bang. Here we go. We go back to d5 to defend h7. The rook runs in here, and the king goes to f8. What does this look like? It's still an opposite color bishop. Now, white's, both players have terrible pawns on the king side. I think this is quite playable for black as well. The bishop's going to have to stay defending this h pawn, but I think black can put up a really good defense here. That might be worth it, going for something like that. Just keep trading the pawns off like this. When you material down, trade pawns. Yeah, I think that's a good option. What black did was played the rook back there, probably thinking the rook was very strong on the e-file, and it does look very strong, particularly when these rooks double. So you can understand the decision not to trade rooks, though the ability to trade off, a couple of pawns like that, I don't know, seems pretty good to me. G4 was played. White has to be careful with these pawns. If you march them too far up the board, they become targets later on that can be attacked. Targets firstly for the rooks and the bishops coming in behind, and secondly, if they end up getting rigid in place with a few holes, this king might be able to run in and get them, particularly this h pawn. So yeah, well, I mean, what else does white do though? Does white play g3, slow play it? The idea is you can answer things like bishop g2 with h4. Not sure if you want to fix all your pawns on black squares like that. I don't know, maybe g4 is right. Okay, doubled. The king came out to defend the bishop. That seems okay. And now here, black really needs to start preparing her king for the endgame. A move like f6 seems really like the sort of idea you should be going for here. The idea is if bishop ever gets on to d4, it's not hitting anything because you've got this pawn there, and you're opening up a square for the king. You're eliminating back row mate threats. F6 is definitely the sort of thing I'd be looking to do. Just get the king that one step closer to the center. It could be very important. Instead, the bishop went to g2. Seems the idea is to continue to harass these pawns and try and lure them further, which I guess is not too bad an idea. So h4 was played, and then the bishop jumped to f3, trying to push them even further forward. The engine, is sort of agreeing with me. Well, kind of. It's saying f6 is high up on its options. It wants to play c5 here. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's just simply getting the rook to defend this a pawn. It does look. I mean, it's very hard to work out what to do with these double pawns. One of them's going to fall at some point. C5, interesting, the engine suggesting that. I suggest f6 myself. Okay, so bishop f3 was played, chasing that pawn forward again, and now, see, the problem is we need to get f6 in. We absolutely need to play f6 before white gets a chance to get this bishop onto d4. There is issues. If this bishop ever moves, the rook comes down here. But f6 right now would seem to be good to me. If the pawn takes, for instance, you can take back with the pawn and let the king out. You can take back with the rook and keep your pawn structure intact. And this king now has a path straight through the center of the board, which is what it needs, or running after this h pawn. I did say this h pawn could be a problem later on. The bishop is got a problem in that it can't defend both the f pawn and the h pawn simultaneously. So obviously, white shouldn't take. But how should white play this? Maybe rook d7. So what if these rooks come here, trade off a pair of rooks? There's still this issue of this king running straight into here that needs to be dealt with. Very interesting. I mean, this rook can go after this a pawn, which is a pain. After rook here, check, king to c3. You've got bishop e2 defending the pawn. What if the king goes to e1? Is that an issue? You got to be careful of the rook coming down with check and going after these pawns here. The bishop's going to be on pre though. But yeah, something like this. And then the rook, the rook can head for the H pawn, or it can head for the B pawn. Interesting stuff. This is a problem. This A pawn charging up the board is a big problem, particularly with this pawn on C6, blocking the bishop, stopping the bishop from defending the queening square. And that's the constant worry for black in this whole position. So that has to be kept in mind when calculating all these variations. Probably why the computer wants to play a move like c5, just to keep this bishop on this line defended. Maybe the bishop can drop back to b7 and defend this as well. But you don't want this pawn just disappearing off the board and this pawn making a run for it with this pawn still on c6. Okay, let's get back and see what happened. So bishop f3 hitting the pawn, g5, and now c5 was played. I mean, basically saying, please take my pawn so I can take your bishop, but it's obviously white's not going to fall for that. It does give white the opportunity to infiltrate with d7 at this point, just run into d7 and harass this c pawn. And then you end up with another pawn on c6 blocking the a pawn's defense. Yeah, it's very hard to tell what to do, like rook e7 maybe, but after rook takes, the bishop takes here. Yeah, I mean, this rook can start infiltrating. Black's got to worry about back row mates, but these pawns are left out to dry, really. And maybe black can play like this. It's hard to tell. It's dodgy. Like you're chasing the king into the middle where it wants to be. The king wants to run in, infiltrate, and steal these pawns, with the help of the bishop and the rook. But on the other hand, this rook getting down here allows things like rook h2 and maybe stealing the h pawn, or the rook coming in and getting behind these pawns, or just sitting on this rank and stopping this rook from running across, because his c pawn might be on pre, and these pawns have trouble pushing without losing one of them. So what actually happened? c5, rook c4. Okay, he didn't infiltrate with d7. He played rook c4. Now, I can see a pretty good opportunity for black here in something like rook d6. And this is quite irritating. Like, does the king run back to e1? It might allow this rook to come in down here, and yeah, this bishop needs to have an answer to this question. Maybe bishop here or something. And the rook can start looking to get in behind these pawns, or get in behind here and take this pawn out. Once this pawn moves, and this h pawn can start, come down the board and start making a run for it. If pawns trade, then you've got another h pawn to replace it. The g pawn replaces the h pawn and starts trading. And this is kind of what black is looking to do to get some counterplay. So it's a fascinating position, but after that, so if he throws his rook in the way, you can just ignore it. You can just leave it. And, you can even better, you can just hit the rook. And that forces the rook trade. And then after pawn takes here, the pawn's defending the c5 pawn. This d pawn, it's very hard to get to this d pawn. There's just bishops and pawns covering all the ways in. And this rook zooming across to a4 can simply be answered maybe by, no, not rook there, that loses a bishop, bishop b7. And it looks like black's going to be able to get the king over to defend this d pawn in time, and it's very hard to see how white makes any progress. This bishop and these pawns together take away all the entrance squares for the king. So yeah, rook d6 here would have been great. It wasn't played though. Rook d8 was played, which is no good, because now rook here, you can't just ignore it and say please undouble my pawns. You got to deal with this problem. The rook, can it head to d6? So the rook just takes on c5. Yeah, so rook takes d3 was played. We got two choices here. King takes and keep the pawn structure intact, or pawn takes. Taking with the pawn is interesting, because the pawn, even though it's isolated, can be used to take away squares from this bishop. So we took with the c pawn. I actually like that idea, even though king takes is preserving the pawn structure, and I think it's still pretty good. There is a problem of rook d6 check and this rook getting in behind again. But yeah, I do like this. Okay, h6. No, I don't think you want to be playing that. Oh, no, 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 no. I think f6 is the way to do it. You got to play f6 here. One of the big things is after this rook takes on c5, you want to be able to answer it with rook c6 and offer a rook trade. But if a rook trade does happen, you need to be able to charge your king into the middle as fast as possible. This is a massive problem playing h6 because after this pawn disappears off the board, the bishop can just sit on d4 and hit this g7 pawn for a very long time. You'd be forced to trade these pawns, and once you trade these pawns and this pawn is gone from h-pawn, from h4, this king no longer has a target, no longer has the ability to charge in and harass the h-pawn for counterplay. So now h6 is, it's really bad. It looks really, really bad because in order to deal with the g-pawn, you're going to have to trade pawns and then take away this awesome target on h4. So like, imagine if you played f6 now and this rook took here and you said, please trade rooks with me. After takes, bishop takes, you might end up losing this pawn here. You can imagine this bishop running in and getting behind it before there's a chance for white to do anything about it. But the problem is if you play something like bishop here and this gets played, sure, you can push this pawn if it gets attacked, but the king is going to infiltrate right into the position. So king c3, king e6, king to d4 maybe. And there's a problem. You can't just run the king in. If you play something like c6, for instance, then this king is just going to run straight after this pawn here. And once this pawn leaves, once that pawn goes, this a pawn runs up the board, and this pawn is blocking its own bishop. And this king is still nowhere near getting after this h pawn. Where are we? Okay, so yeah, so you can actually just probably sack this pawn and go straight for the h pawn, to be honest. You can just say, go ahead, go get my pawn, and go straight into it. And so after something like this, do you need to move the bishop at all? You just run into here. But white has got a bit of a problem here. You can throw in these couple of moves if you want and harass this pawn here. Black should just, of course, let him take it. And then after king here, you've got this pawn that's just going to charge up the board and force a bishop sack for it. You end up with 3 pawns for the bishop, and this king is still miles behind in the race. So like if we do a bit of racing and see how this goes, for instance, king d4. Yeah, hang on. This pawn is on pre. Probably back here after king g4. This bishop needs to do something about it, like this. Then h5, king e3 maybe, h4. This is winning for white apparently, because the bishop can't deal with all the pawns. It's still very difficult to work it all out. But that's the idea. Try and create some counterplay. This is a lot more complicated than I originally thought. There's actually a lot of variations here. But as you can see, white has to be incredibly careful in these lines. Otherwise, this pawn just sails through. And that's kind of what you want to do. You want to make white have to be careful. But yeah, as it turns out, you don't even have to give up this pawn. You can throw this bishop d5 in and threaten, gain a tempo threatening this pawn, and then run the king in, and then run it into here. So going all the way back here, f6 is definitely the way to do it. If you play h6, which was played, after rook here, which was played, I think doing this just loses now. Because after takes, there's no way, bishop d4 can be played. And there's no way for this king to get into the game. Because this bishop is constantly harassing this pawn here. You have to go out this way, I guess. And it allows something like f5 to be played, just keeping the king out, which is a problem. After takes, there's no h-pawn target anymore to go after. Sure, you can do stuff like this and play it like this. And yeah, black doesn't have a target, so white is just now trying to find a way to infiltrate with the king and create a passed pawn. According to the engine, it's not quite a whole point of advantage. So So maybe there are still defensive possibilities here for black, but it's very, very hard. Very, very hard for black to defend, I mean. Anyway, let's go back to the actual game. Rook takes, H takes. So just traded the pawn straight away. And then Rook E7 was played. I still think the best chance is to play Rook C6 and have the pure opposite color bishop ending. Rook E7, I think this is just now a fairly easy win for white, because white's king can infiltrate and black can't. So F5 was played. Maybe bishop D4 first is the way to play it. You got to stop F6, because black can still go F6 and centralize the king. He just no longer has the option of going after the H pawn anymore. But black has no counterplay, no way to make this game a race, to make white have to really work hard calculating through the variations properly. But I still think bishop D4 is the way to play. F5 was played. I think F6 is definitely the move here. You got to play F6 to let that king run in. Even though it doesn't have a target, it still needs to be able to centralize without being paralyzed to the defense of the G7 pawn. After takes, once again you've got bishop there. Bishop F4 is also very interesting. C6 can be played here because the rook can defend this pawn from A7. Not sure if it would though. After here, do you play rook A7? Yeah, you just try and defend and just race your king over to here as fast as you can. It's probably still better for white. It's probably still winning for white. There's bishop E3 and then rook here. This king is running in so fast. It's going to get into B6 very quickly, but at least this king can come over and help give the C pawn some defense, and this bishop might be able to harass this pawn here in the process. So interesting stuff. What happened was rook D7 was played. I think this is once again threatening a simple tactic. Bishop E4, I think that's the idea, to hit this pawn and that pawn simultaneously. This is another time where black has gone for a cheap tactic, which is not going to work against a very strong player. It forces white to play a move he wants to play anyway, king C3, and now the tactic's gone, and this whole rook to D7 move just ended up wasting a move in the race to get the king over to the to queenside. F6 had to be played. Surely, yeah, F6 would be played. So after rook D7, king C3, still F6 needs to be played. You have to play F6 to let the king out. Wasn't played. Bishop D5 was played, just harassing this A pawn here. B3 was played to block the line of that bishop. I'm wondering if A3 might be better, or is A4? A4 can even be played here, because you want to march that A pawn up the board anyway. So yeah, B3 might be a problem in that it ties the B pawn down. It's going to take extra moves to get your pawns up the board. Normally a move like A4 is terrible because A5 cements the pawn in place and creates a weakness here. But in this particular ending, A4 looks fine because black has control over these dark squares on the queen side. So B3 was played, and then C6. I think that's a massive mistake because that just blocks the bishop out of defending that diagonal. And this pawn is guaranteed to fall now because the rook can just come up here and mop it up. The rook can't defend it because the bishop will be guarding A7. And once this pawn falls, this pawn just sails through, and this bishop can't even put up any resistance to stop the pawn because your own pawn is in the way. This is actually a very common concept, very common idea in bishop endings, is pawns on C6 to block this diagonal, F6 to block a bishop diagonal, F3, having a pawn on F3, stopping a white bishop blocking this diagonal, and a pawn on C3. You've got to be careful not to block your own bishop from defending a rook's pawn from getting through to the end, and that's exactly what this C6 move does. Now, once again, F6 has got to be the move. Definitely, just F6. And and rook across can be answered by things like bishop B7, which keeps your position alive, keeps things defended. So C6 was played. I think that just threw the game away. I think even now, even after all the little micro mistakes, F6 still gave black decent drawing chances. Now there's no chance. the game's over. Rook a5. So rook e7 was played, hitting the bishop. The bishop went to d4, which you can see the problems now. f6 can't be played. It just can't be played without losing a pawn. Well, maybe it can be. Maybe you can still play it, because the idea is after the bishop takes back on f6, the rook goes to f7, skewering the bishop to the pawn here. So rook c7 was played. I don't know what that does. Maybe that needs to be played anyway. After takes. The idea is if the bishop is silly enough to take it, the rook can go here, and you can grab this pawn here at least, eliminating more pawns off the board. This a pawn is still sailing through, but at least you can put up some resistance. Maybe the rook can get back here and guard it that way, or maybe you can sack this pawn. I don't know, something like that. What happened was rook c7, and after, okay, white didn't even take the pawn. He should just take the pawn. There's no reason not to. But it looks like he's trying to get his rook further into the game. He's got to be careful though, because yeah, this king might actually get in the way, believe it or not. Just take the pawn. Okay, rook b4 was played, king b4 was played, rook b7 check, king c5. So white's trying to do what's normally the right thing, which is infiltrate the king into these dark squares. But this causes a bit of a problem in that, yeah, this king is a bit of is in the way. Can you go f6 now? Yeah, the idea, the same idea as before. If the bishop takes, the king comes here, and the king is actually hugely in the way. I'm still trying to play this f6 move. Bishop f3, according to the engine, is an interesting idea, because the king sitting here blocks the rook from defending f5. This bishop might just be able to sneak in and steal a pawn, or sneak back here and steal this pawn. I mean, the threat of just bishop e2 grabs the pawn is really interesting. What black did though was terrible, and that just loses the game on the spot. There's nothing to stop the a pawn from going through. It just takes. Can't take with the c pawn because the bishop will be on pre. Yeah, a pawn and then a4. You can't stop the pawn. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. The c pawn is blocking the bishop from defending a8, and that pawn just sails through. And yeah, black decided to nick a pawn. But yeah, well done to white. Yeah, black's nicking a lot of pawns. White doesn't care though, and this game is just over. Okay, at this point, black has resigned, obviously. Oh, there was obviously no chance. After this, the queen can just grab this if it wants, and yeah, there's nothing black can do about it. He's just lost. Okay, so a very interesting game. Black actually had a lot of chances with the opposite color bishop ending to try and get a draw, and there's quite a few mistakes there, positional mistakes, which definitely need to be taken note of. Yeah, so I hope you all learned something from that game. It was a long game, and thanks for listening. Goodbye.